The woman who called herself Anya arrived with the morning supply convoy, a ghost slipping out of the dust-caked transport before the grit had even settled. She carried a single, worn duffel bag and a set of orders so thin they seemed an afterthought. At Forward Operating Base Obsidian, a place carved from rock and simmering heat, new arrivals were a spectacle. Not her. She moved with a liquid economy, her gaze sweeping over the perimeter fences, the drone hangars, and the faces of the soldiers who watched her pass. Their eyes lingered for a moment on her plain gray coveralls and the tired lines etched around her own eyes, then dismissed her. She was logged as civilian maintenance, a logistics clerk sent to help organize the perpetual chaos of the base's supply depots. Another cog, in a place defined by rank and firepower, she registered as little more than a shadow, already forgotten as she was pointed toward the drab administrative barracks. She found her small room, a sterile cube of metal and composite board, and unpacked with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed stepping off the transport. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, just spare clothes, a small toolkit, and a thick, leather-bound book with no title. She placed the book on the small metal desk, her fingers brushing its worn cover for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then she turned and walked toward the heart of the base, her footsteps making no sound against the packed earth. The base was a hive of controlled tension, the air thick with the hum of generators and the distant whine of drone engines undergoing diagnostics. She was a phantom in this world, her presence so understated it was an absence. Colonel Madsen did not like surprises, and the woman named Anya was a surprise. He reviewed her file for the third time, the single sheet of digital paper glowing on his terminal. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic emptiness. Name, Anya Petrova. Position, Auxiliary Logistics Technician. Origin, Central Command Depot, Ramstein. No service record, no commendations, no history to speak of. She was a blank slate, and blank slates in a war zone were either spies or mistakes. He summoned her to his office, a space that was as Spartan and unforgiving as the man himself. She stood before his desk, her posture relaxed but not disrespectful, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She didn't fidget. She simply waited. "Your file is thin," Madsen began, his voice flat, a tool for chipping away at deception. Unusually so, Anya met his gaze without flinching. "I'm a technician, Colonel. We don't accumulate much paperwork." Her voice was low, calm. It held no deference, but no challenge either. It was simply a statement of fact. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is a forward operating base, not a warehouse in Germany. We deal in intelligence, in threats. Everyone here has a purpose, a clearly defined role. I'm not sure what yours is." He was testing her, looking for a crack, a flicker of insecurity. He found none. "My orders are to streamline supply requisitions for the Spectre 7 program," she said, her tone unchanged. "The system is inefficient. It's costing operational readiness." Madsen scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "The readiness of my drones is determined by my pilots and my technicians, not a clerk. You will stay out of the hangars. You will organize your boxes, and you will file your reports. Is that understood?" He expected a nod, a quiet, "Yes, sir." Instead, she held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. "Understood, Colonel," she said, the words clipped precise. As she turned to leave, Madsen felt a strange, unsettling certainty that he had not gotten the measure of this woman. He had dismissed her, but the dismissal fell hollow, as if he had just tried to command the desert wind to stop blowing. Anya spent the next week in observation. She did her assigned work in the supply depot, a windowless container filled with crates and inventory lists. She organized it with a ruthless, methodical logic that had the quartermasters muttering in appreciation. But her real work began when she was unseen. She would walk the perimeter at dusk, her eyes not on the horizon, but on the sensor towers, the power conduits, the overlapping fields of the automated defense turrets. She noted the minute vibrations in the deck plates of the drone hangars, the subtle shifts in the engine pitch of the Spectre 7 units. The drone, a marvel of stealth and surveillance technology, was the base's crown jewel. It was also temperamental, a thoroughbred that bucked its riders as often as it won races. She watched the maintenance crews, their movements frantic and sometimes inefficient. They treated the machine like an adversary, a collection of parts to be forced into compliance. Anya watched it differently, with a kind of diagnostic empathy, as if listening to its silent complaints. One afternoon, a young, cocky lieutenant named Kale saw her lingering near Hangar 3. "Something interesting, clerk?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. Anya's eyes were on the main rotor assembly of a Spectre drone. "The harmonic dampener on Blade 2 is misaligned," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll see microfractures in the housing within 50 flight hours," Kale laughed. "And you know this how? By staring at it." She didn't answer, her gaze still fixed on the machine. Her worn gray coveralls were zipped up, but as she turned, the collar gaped for a second, revealing a small, dark patch sewn into the faded fabric of the shirt underneath. It was barely visible, a shape of a nocturnal bird of prey, its stitching old and frayed. Kale didn't see it. He just saw a woman who didn't know her place. He shook his head and walked away, dismissing her as he would a fly. But she had seen everything she needed to see. The pressure arrived, as it always did, carried on the wind. A sandstorm of biblical proportions rolled in from the west, a churning wall of ochre that swallowed the sky. It wasn't just sand, it was fine, corrosive dust that worked its way into every circuit and joint. Within an hour, the base's primary communications array went down. Not a flicker, a hard, dead silence. Panic, low, and acidic, began to bubble through the command center. They were blind and deaf. The tech team, two highly skilled specialists, worked frantically, their faces illuminated by the frantic glow of diagnostic screens that all read the same thing: catastrophic system failure. They replaced power converters, rerouted data streams, and swore at schematics. Colonel Madsen stood behind them, a statue of contained fury, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. 40 minutes passed, then an hour. The backup system was failing, too, its signal degrading under the atmospheric assault. They were losing their connection to the outside world, becoming an island in a sea of roaring static. Through it all, Anya remained at her post in the supply depot, cross-referencing parts manifests. But she wasn't just working, she was listening. She heard the change in the tenor of the base's hum, the rising pitch of panicked voices carried on the internal comms. She felt the shift in pressure. When the second hour began, she put down her datapad, zipped up her coveralls, and walked out into the storm. The wind tore at her, whipping stinging particles against her skin, but she moved through it with a steady, unhurried pace, her head bowed, her path unerring. She was just a clerk, a shadow. No one noticed her leave her post. No one saw her walking toward the silent, crippled heart of the base. She arrived at the base of the comms tower like a wraith appearing from the storm. The two technicians were near their wits' end, their faces slick with sweat and grime despite the wind. They barely registered her presence. The primary junction box is fried. One of them yelled over the gale. "We've tried bypassing it, but the whole conduit is dead." Anya didn't speak. She moved past them to the main power conduit, a thick, armored cable running from the generator hub to the tower. She knelt, her gloved fingers running along its length, feeling for something they could only see on their useless screens. The technicians exchanged a confused, irritated glance. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you need to get back inside," one of them started. She ignored him. Her hand stopped at a specific junction, a place where 3 smaller cables fed into the main line. It looked perfectly sealed, but Anya's touch was more precise than a visual inspection. She pulled a small, multifaceted tool from a pocket in her coveralls, a device the technicians didn't recognize. With a few deft movements, she unsealed the plate. Inside, a single connector, no bigger than a thumbnail, was coated in a thin layer of verdigrease, the storm's fine dust having mixed with condensation to create a perfect insulator. It was a 1 in a million flaw, something no diagnostic would ever catch. She took out a small, stiff brush and a vial of conductive cleaning solution. Without a word, she cleaned the contact, blew the residue away, and resealed the plate. The entire action took less than 30 seconds. Back in the command center, a monitor flickered. Then another. A wave of green status indicators cascaded across the main screen. "We have a signal," someone shouted. "Primary link is back online. Full strength." The technicians at the tower stared at the junction plate, then at the silent woman who was already turning to walk back into the storm. She hadn't explained, hadn't boasted. She had simply acted, and in the sudden, blessed silence of a restored connection, her quiet intervention was louder than any explosion. The whispers started then. The two comms technicians told their story, at first disbelieving it themselves. The clerk, the one who just walked up and fixed it. It was a minor ripple in the base's rigid hierarchy, but it was a ripple nonetheless. A few days later, Lieutenant Kale, his arrogance undiminished, swaggered into the supply depot. He'd just returned from a range exercise, his advanced combat rifle caked in dust and carbon. He saw Anya cataloging medical supplies. "Hey, clerk," he called out, dropping the weapon onto the counter with a loud clatter. "Make yourself useful. Strip this and clean it. I want it gleaming." It was a deliberate act of humiliation, assigning a soldier's sacred task to a civilian pencil pusher. He expected a protest, or at least reluctant, clumsy compliance. Anya looked from the rifle to his smug face, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. She simply picked up the weapon. Kale leaned against a crate, ready to mock her ineptitude, but what he saw silenced him. Her hands moved with a swift, fluid grace that was mesmerizing. She didn't just strip the rifle. She disassembled it with the innate familiarity of a master armorer. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the gas tube, every piece was removed with practiced, economical motions. She laid the parts out on a clean cloth in perfect order. Then she began to clean, her movements precise, efficient, almost reverent. As she worked, her coverall sleeve rode up her forearm. Kale's eyes drifted from her hands to the sleeve, and then to what it had partially revealed. Sewn into the inner lining of her worn work shirt was that patch. This time he saw it clearly. It wasn't a unit insignia he recognized. It was a stylized black owl, its wings spread as if in silent flight. In the center of its chest was a single, embroidered silver star. He'd seen that symbol once before, in a classified briefing on defunct special operations units. A ghost unit, a myth. They were called the Night Watch. He felt a cold shock, a sudden, horrifying recalibration of his entire world. This woman, this clerk he had ordered to clean his rifle, was methodically reassembling his weapon with the hands of a ghost. He stood frozen, the smirk wiped from his face, replaced by a pale, dawning dread. The incident with the rifle changed things for Kale. He said nothing, but he started watching her. He saw the way she moved, the way her eyes tracked the drones taking off, the way she never made a wasted motion. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were beginning to sprout into a terrifying respect. 2 weeks later, the ultimate test came. During a high-stakes reconnaissance mission deep in hostile territory, Spectre 7, their most advanced drone, suddenly went haywire. Alarms blared through the command center. On the main screen, the drone's telemetry was a chaotic cascade of error messages. It was losing altitude, its controls unresponsive. "She's going to a death spiral," the pilot shouted, his hands flying uselessly over his console. "I've lost all control." Colonel Madsen stood behind him, his face grim. "What are our options?" "We could try to reboot the system, sir, but if it fails, she'll crash. We'll lose the asset and the intel. The alternative was to self-destruct, sacrificing the multi-million-dollar drone to keep its technology out of enemy hands." Madsen was about to give the order. "Don't," a quiet voice said. All heads turned. Anya stood at the entrance to the control pit. She had walked in so silently no one had noticed her. Before Madsen could demand what she was doing there, she moved past him, her eyes locked on the screen. "The flight control matrix is in a feedback loop," she stated, not to anyone in particular. "A reboot will cascade the failure." She reached the pilot's station. "Get up," she said. It wasn't a request. The young pilot, stunned, vacated the chair. Anya sat down. Her fingers flew across the control interface, not with the frantic energy of the pilot, but with a calm, surgical precision. She bypassed the primary controls, diving deep into the drone's core programming. She wasn't flying the drone. She was speaking to it in its native language. On the screen, the chaotic descent stabilized. The alarms fell silent. With a series of subtle, masterful inputs, she brought the Spectre 7 out of its dive and settled it into a stable hover, thousands of feet above the enemy terrain. A collective breath was released in the room. She hadn't just saved the drone. She had tamed it. The command center was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the servers. Everyone stared, first at the stabilized drone on the screen, then at the woman in the pilot's chair. Her face was calm, focused, illuminated by the soft glow of the console. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Colonel Madsen finally found his voice, though it was strained. Report. What was that? Anya's eyes didn't leave the screen as she initiated a deep diagnostic. A vulnerability in the heuristic flight control software. Under specific atmospheric pressures and signal degradation, it creates a recursive error in the gyroscopic stabilizers. The drone was trying to correct a problem that didn't exist, compounding the error until it lost control. She spoke in simple, direct terms, stripping the event of its chaos and leaving only the cold, hard logic of a design flaw. A flaw no one, not the manufacturers nor the base's own experts, had ever anticipated. Madsen stared at her, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The comms array, the rifle, and now this. This wasn't a clerk. This was something else entirely. As if on cue, his private, secure line buzzed. He answered it, his eyes still locked on Anya. Madsen, he barked. The voice on the other end was quiet, belonging to General Thorne from High Command. Colonel, the general said, his tone devoid of pleasantries. I'm getting a report that Spectre 7 just had a near-fatal incident. I'm also getting a report that it was resolved. Give me a status on Nix. Madsen froze. Sir, I don't know anyone by that name. There was a long pause. Check the roster for a civilian logistics technician. Thorne said, his voice edged with impatience. Name of Anya Petrova. That's her cover. Her call sign is Nix. Colonel, do you have any idea who you have on your base? Madsen's blood ran cold. Nix. He knew the name. A legend from the Black Ops community. The lead field operative for the original Ghost Alone project, the precursor to the Spectre program. An operator so skilled, she was rumored to be more machine than human. She was reported killed in action over the Zagros Mountains 3 years ago. She's here, Madsen managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. To find the flaws you can't see from a lab, the general's message was clear. They hadn't sent him a clerk. They had sent him a ghost to hunt the ghosts in his machines. Madsen ended the call, his mind reeling. He looked through the reinforced glass of the command center into the hangar bay. The mission was over. Spectre 7 had been guided back flawlessly by Anya's steady hands and was now being prepped for post-flight analysis. He saw her there, standing beside the drone, her hand resting gently on its fuselage. She was no longer wearing the nondescript gray coveralls. She had changed back in her simple shirt and work pants. As she moved, the light caught the patch on the inside of her shirt, the one Lieutenant Kale had seen. The Black Owl, the Night Watch. It was all real. He walked out of the command center, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The technicians and pilots parted for him, their faces a mixture of awe and confusion as they watched him approach the quiet woman. He walked until he was standing a few feet from her. She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. The weariness in her eyes now looked different. It wasn't fatigue. It was the profound weight of knowledge and experience. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the hulking machine a silent witness between them. Madsen, a man who had built his career on regulations, on hierarchy, on the unshakable certainty of his own authority, felt it all dissolve in the presence of this woman. He had dismissed her. He had underestimated her. He had been a fool. He straightened his shoulders, not out of arrogance, but out of a new, profound sense of duty. He drew himself up to his full height, clicked his heels together, and rendered a slow, formal salute. It was the highest sign of respect one soldier could give another. Across the hangar, Lieutenant Kale saw the gesture and immediately snapped to attention. One by one, the other soldiers in the bay, technicians, pilots, guards, followed suit. A silent, rippling wave of recognition and reverence spread through the cavernous space. Anya watched the colonel, her expression unchanging. She didn't smile or show any sign of surprise. The respect, now that it was given, seemed to mean little to her. It was the work that mattered, the problem that needed solving. The human equation of pride and recognition was a variable she had long ago learned to disregard. In response to the colonel's salute, the highest honor he could bestow, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, nothing more. Then she turned her attention back to the Spectre 7 drone, her fingers tracing a seam along its composite skin. The moment passed. The soldiers, following Madsen's lead, slowly lowered their arms. The rigid formality broke, but the atmosphere in the hangar had been permanently altered. They no longer saw a clerk. They saw a quiet legend standing among them, a guardian who had walked out of the shadows to protect them from their own blind spots. Madsen turned and walked away without another word, leaving her to her silent communion with the machine. Her departure from the base was as quiet as her arrival. A week later, after filing a detailed report directly to High Command, a report that bypassed Madsen's authority entirely, she was gone. She slipped away on another pre-dawn transport, carrying the same duffel bag, leaving behind nothing but a perfectly organized supply depot and the ghost of her presence. The final image for those who had witnessed her was of her standing alone in the hangar, her hand resting on the drone. The machine, once an object of frustration, now seemed to hum with a different energy under her touch, a quiet resonance between creator and creation. Her silent strength had been revealed not through words, but through undeniable action. She had arrived as a nobody and left as a myth, leaving behind a legacy of earned, unspoken respect that would linger in the dust of FOB Obsidian long after her footsteps had faded.